Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer, where we are digging into the source material to unmask one of the most iconic, mysterious, and honestly, downright intense historical figures of all time. We're talking about Bodhidharma. He's a figure totally shrouded in mystery, often famously referred to as the blue-eyed barbarian. So let's jump right in and see what the sources actually say.
Now, if you've ever watched a kung fu flick, read a martial arts comic, or even just casually looked into fighting history, you have absolutely encountered Bodhidharma. In pop culture, he is universally hailed as the living legend, the father of all martial arts, and specifically, the founder of Shaolin Kung Fu. He's the guy who supposedly took a group of peaceful, meditating monks and turned them into, literally, unstoppable warriors.
But here is the million-dollar question. Is that legend actually true? Did a single monk from the West really travel all the way to China and just invent the foundation for global martial arts? Well, the source material we have paints a picture that is way more complicated and, honestly, a lot more fascinating than the movies would have you believe.
Okay, part 1, the martial arts legend. Let's look exactly at how Bodhidharma became so heavily intertwined with the physical conditioning of the famous Shaolin monks.
It's actually staggering just how much is attributed to this one single monk. Legend has it the Bodhidharma arrived at the Shaolin Temple and found the monks there in just terrible physical shape from way too much sitting around. So the story goes that he taught them techniques to maintain their condition, including a set of moves called the 18 Arhat hands. He's also credited with introducing internal energy practices like the Sinew Metamorphosis Classic, and famously leaving behind the I Ching Jing martial arts manual. But we really have to ask, where do these claims actually come from?
Well, the dates kind of reveal the real story here. Historical records show Bodhidharma lived in the 5th or 6th century. But that famous I Ching Jing manual he supposedly wrote, historians actually date its composition to 1624. That is over 1,000 years later. And the widespread popularization of him as this ultimate martial arts founder, believe it or not, that didn't even happen until a serialized novel called The Travels of Lao Tsen was published between 1904 and 1907. So the whole martial arts myth is actually a much, much later invention, basically stemming from a Taoist tradition that started associating gymnastics with Bodhidharma.
So if he wasn't a kung fu master, who was he? Moving on to part 2, the historical monk. Let's explore the surprisingly sparse evidence we actually have from the people who lived around his time.
Here is where it gets really interesting, because even his closest contemporaries couldn't agree on where the guy came from. On one hand, you have the Luoyang record from 547 CE, which claims he was a Persian Central Asian arriving from the wild borderlands. But then, you have Tan Lin's 6th century preface claiming he was a South Indian, specifically the 3rd son of a great Indian king. So was he of Persian descent or South Indian royalty? These conflicting early accounts perfectly set up the massive historical mystery of his true identity.
But you know, despite those cloudy origins, his reputation was absolutely staggering. In traditional texts and art, he's depicted with these really striking physical features, which earned him nicknames like the Blue-Eyed Barbarian and the Bearded Man. He's called the Wall-Gazing Brahmin and the Golden Rooster. But most importantly, he is universally revered as the first Chinese patriarch of Chan, which you probably know as Zen Buddhism. Later texts even elevated him to the 28th patriarch in an uninterrupted line directly from Gautama Buddha himself.
Which brings us to part 3, wall-gazing and Zen. Let's shift our focus from where he came from to what he actually taught.
We really need to unpack this defining term, wall-gazing, or biguan in Chinese. It's heavily associated with quieting the mind. But what did that actually look like in practice? Modern scholars actually debate this a lot. Was it literal? Like, was he literally sitting cross-legged, staring at a physical brick wall? Or was it a metaphor for a mental state, a way of abiding in this bright, non-discriminating state of mind, where you become firm, like a wall, to outside distractions? The original sources totally leave room for both interpretations.
Now, if we want to know his core philosophy, it's outlined in the 2 entrances and 4 practices. This is literally the only text that modern scholars widely accept as Bodhidharma's authentic original teaching. And it outlines 2 steps to enlightenment. First, the entrance of principle, which is all about directly apprehending your true nature. And second, the entrance of practice, which means accepting your circumstances with total equanimity, dropping all your cravings, and living without wrong thoughts. Notice something? No martial arts here, just incredibly deep, profound mental discipline.
He's also heavily associated with the Lankavatara Sutra, which is famously known as a highly difficult and obscure text.
The vital takeaway from the sources here is that the sutra emphasizes inner enlightenment and a profound lack of reliance on words. It essentially argues that words are just artificial creations, right? And true realization comes from an insight into reality that goes completely beyond our standard human categories of language and discrimination.
All right, part 4, myths and miracles. Because a figure this enigmatic couldn't just remain a simple meditation teacher in the eyes of history.
Picture this. It's one of the most famous encounters in all of Zen literature. Bodhidharma is brought before Emperor Wu of Liang, who was a huge, fervent patron of Buddhism. The emperor, clearly pretty proud of all his worldly piety, asks Bodhidharma, "How much karmic merit have I earned for ordaining monks and building monasteries?"
And Bodhidharma just looks at him and hits him with this incredibly blunt reply. None. There is no noble truth, there is only emptiness. I mean, imagine saying that to an emperor. He completely rejects the emperor's worldly, transactional view of religion right to his face. It just captures his intense, uncompromising personality so perfectly. And following that encounter, the legends only get more visceral. He supposedly retreated to a cave near the Shaolin Monastery and sat facing a wall for 9 straight years. When he kept falling asleep, legend says he literally cut off his own eyelids. And where they hit the floor, the first tea plant sprouted. His legs reportedly atrophied from years of sitting. And to prove his absolute sincerity, his would-be disciple, Huke, stood in the deep, freezing snow and cut off his own arm. These are intense, highly mythical stories meant to symbolize absolute, unwavering dedication.
And the mystery doesn't even stop when he dies. 3 years after Bodhidharma passed away, a Chinese official named Song Yun claimed he saw the monk walking the Pamir Mountains, carrying a single shoe, telling him he was going home. When they finally dug up Bodhidharma's grave to check the story, it was completely empty, except for a single sandal. The message being, of course, the master had quietly gone home.
So, what do we actually do with a man who is equal parts history and myth? Let's bring this explainer to a close with part 5, the true legacy.
His cultural impact today is just these good luck charms. Well, they are actually modeled directly after Bodhidharma. They don't have legs because of that legend we just talked about, where his legs atrophied during his 9-year wall-gazing meditation. Think about that. Over 400,000 people attend a festival in Japan every single year just to buy these dolls, all based on a monk from the 6th century.
And his philosophical legacy is just as enduring. Take a look at this famous 4-line stanza. It encapsulates Zen Buddhism perfectly, a special transmission outside the scriptures, pointing directly to one's mind. Now, scholars tell us this stanza was actually written around the year 1108, which is centuries after he died, but it was attributed to him because it just so perfectly captures the spirit of the movement he is credited with founding. Which brings us to our final thought for today. Is the myth of a man sometimes more important than his actual history? Look, Bodhidharma likely didn't cut off his eyelids, and the historical evidence firmly shows he didn't invent Shaolin Kung Fu. But that myth, the idea of him as the living legend father of all martial arts, has inspired millions of people globally to seek profound mental and physical discipline. The facts might be sparse for sure, but his legacy is undeniably real. Thank you for joining me for this explainer of the source material. I want to leave you with one final question to ponder. If a story doesn't have to be historically accurate to change the world, what other myths are we living by today?